Very good evening. Namaste and welcome to Chitti Media. I'm your host, Sharan Sethi, and you're watching another episode of Vaishali Dialogue. In today's episode, we'll be discussing about the historical patterns and the current disinformation campaign that the Pakistani state has been doing against India. And there has been a lot of evidence recorded against this, where the Indian government has banned almost 20 YouTube channels which have lakhs of subscribers, and this is a part of the sinister pattern that the country has against its neighbor. Who better to discuss this with two veterans of the Indian Army, Major General Sudhakarji and Major General Harsha Kakkar. Both of them have spoken earlier on our channels and are extremely popular with our audience. First of all, let me take a minute to give you my humble pranams for all the service that you've done, gentlemen. Thank you so much, and welcome to Chitta Media once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharan.
Thank you, Sharan. Thank you.
Right. General Harsha, sir, you wrote an article in the Statesman, and I found it to be absolutely amazing because you go into the quantification of how exactly this has impacted our country, right? In terms of what the sinister pattern that the Pakistani intelligence agencies and different institutions has against India. So how has this sort of panned out, and what exactly are the areas of target for them?
See, as far as the Pakistan DGISPR, which is the inter-services, basically the one which projects the three services, the way these guys have been working is, after all, you got to realize that firstly, let's take a background look at Pakistan. It's a state which is run by the army. The government is only for namesake. What the army does cannot be questioned. So the publicity department of theirs has hired a large number of professionals, and it also continues to take in these youngsters in as interns for a period of time. The intention is to create a propaganda base with the intention of bringing down the Indian reputation globally, bringing down, projecting within India and looking for a communal divide. And if you notice that those 20 channels plus earlier to that, when Facebook pulled out hundreds of pages, not once, but twice, thrice, and you'll find this as a regular feature. You'll find it on every social media site. You go to Instagram, you go to Twitter, you find a large number of these handles with Indian names, with Indian bases, projecting the Pakistani mindset, almost in sync with the way you'd find the Global Times projecting the China mindset and a large number of their people working. The intention is not to project the Pakistani viewpoint. The intention is to exploit the religious and the cultural divide that exists in our society. Exploit it to enhance enhance problems. If you look at, let's take it a little bit, not only within the ISPR, but also if you take it the way they link up with their own people. You look at the way Imran Khan has been talking about a Hindutva government in India. You look at what Fawad Chaudhry said 2-3 days ago, when he said that we have, two two zealot governments, one Afghanistan, the Taliban, one in India. We've been projected as an anti-minority government. You see the Pak-based political leaders in the UK. You find them raising. 2 days back, there was an article in the Dawn which said that 28 UK politicians have written to the Indian High Commission asking for, various issues in terms of human rights. It was nowhere in any other newspaper, nowhere on any other social media site. Was it an invention? So you look at the way things are moving. The intention is to exploit the Indian society. You look at the time of the farmers' agitation. Who was backing? The funds were coming from China and Pakistan, routed through Pakistan, but from both sides. You look at what's happening today in Nagaland when the protests are still continuing on the incident that took place in Mon. There has to be somebody from outside funding it, because children are stopped from going to school. They're being told to join protests. You look at the newspapers, they're not local Nagaland owned. So there is a sort of an institutionalized funding to try and create disparity within India, to try and, project India globally outside as a
Right.
nation which is intolerant, as a nation which doesn't care for its minorities.
Right.
And leading the pack is the DGISPR, which has got an organized system of functioning on this.
Right. On a slightly lighter note, what I found to be very amusing in what you wrote is that you also mentioned they've been hiring hundreds of information warfare specialists and also interns. Now, in the millennial language, interns are generally people who are underpaid and are taken for free. So I wouldn't be surprised, looking at the state of the economy in Pakistan, they would want even free interns
They
to do all of
see
this.
what they do is, I mean, the moment you finish in college, you got to do internship if you want to get a degree. So what do
Yeah.
they do? These are the guys they pick up free of charge. If you think that the Pak Army can offer them anything in terms of good funds, but you've got to remember the only organization which can afford to pay its salary in Pakistan is the army.
Right.
Even the various missions abroad are not getting salary. But you
Right.
try and stop the Pak Army from getting salary, Imran Khan won't have a home to go to.
Right. Yeah. And what is very interesting is also that Imran Khan has finally, I think, in his recent speech, acknowledged how India India's way ahead in terms of its economic progress than Pakistan, and that it's almost too late for them. And this sign of acknowledgement perhaps comes too late, but we'll have to wait and watch how the economy progresses. But let me come back to you, sir. General Sudhakarji, in terms of the institutions that are supporting this, how would you describe the historical patterns and where do you think this is emerging from?
Firstly, Sharon, thank you for inviting me again to your channel. Grateful. And more than that, I am very lucky to be a co-panelist with a very eminent scholar general, if I may say. He's been our instructor. And so it's a profound kind of a linkage one is able to reconnect with the Guru and Shishya. I'm grateful to having given me this opportunity to connect with General Kakar. He's well-known. In the second innings, his articles are well read, and his participations in the webinar and many other things are most sought after. Having said that, Sharon, to save on time, very quickly, I would say the first and foremost thing is the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan as a nation state was, I would say, it was born with a genetic disorder in the lighter side. Okay, when I say that genetic disorder, take your mind back to 1946 when the elections were held and Muslim League had won the elections. Then the partition had taken place, and the mayhem and the kind of dislocation of people had taken place across the border. And after that, the founding father, one who had thought the idea of Pakistan was basically conceived by nobody other than Muhammad Ali Jinnah. You know that he passed away in the year 1948. The single man who had conceived the idea of the nation state of Pakistan based on the religion, having passed away, he actually left a void. And along with him, Liaquat Ali Khan, who was the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, this is important to understand the institution. He also was assassinated in the year 1951, if I'm not wrong. So look at the leadership vacuum which was created for the people who had conceived the very idea of Pakistan. Okay, so having said that, unfortunately, the state had actually come about into being without any infrastructural support existing or any kind of support system. Whatever support systems were existing, they're very weak as far as the institutional structures are concerned. For example, the capital of Pakistan to start with actually started at Karachi. Karachi had no locus. It had no prior experience of being a capital.
Right.
You can well imagine. Similarly, the supporting staff, the bureaucrats, were absolutely in a weak frame, weak structure. So likewise, when it went on, the year 1953 was the first coup. It was not a military coup, it was a constitutional coup. The constitutional coup was so designed, although it was at the behest of, I would say, the army chief, Ayub Khan, General Ayub Khan. Then the Governor General, despite the leader of the party having had or having enjoyed the constitutional support and the majority, was dismissed by the Governor General. Look at the arbitrariness and the kind of um, imposing his will at the behest of army, and throwing out or dismissing a government which was in power, which has been elected to the power, enjoying the constitutional majority. Okay, so look at the weak framework, and thereafter what happened, you see, this was the start point of covert support of the bureaucracy coming into the power of the structure of Pakistan. And soon after that, in 1958, it was an overt kind of a military coup which took place. The Field Marshal Ayub Khan had taken over, martial law had been imposed. And thereafter, after 1958, we had another one in 77, and the last one was in 99. So therefore, there is always a struggle between the civil and the military. Who wants to come into the power? In a scenario like this, when the institutions are weak, when the civil governance is very fragile, and which is characterized by lack of governance, also characterized by nepotism, by corruption, and a host of other negative issues, with a big state, big power nearby, that is China. This is actually speaking, makes an ideal breeding ground for what we call as the institutional deficiency, and cut out for a thing like known as the deep state. The deep state in Pakistan is known as the establishment. Back to you, if I have answered your question. Maybe General Kakar is going to be more knowledgeable on the subject. He may like to throw some light.
Right. General Kakar, would you please like to add on to that?
See,
generally, the definition of a deep state seems very conspiratorial. But in reality, the deep state is formed by different institutions and individuals in Pakistan, and there is a certain pattern that we've witnessed. So it would be very nice if you could elaborate on this.
See, the deep state in Pakistan, the way it's termed today, has not only the military, or it's basically the ISI, which actually the DG ISI is the second most powerful man, forgetting about all other important guys after the army chief. He is the one who does all the political manipulations within the country. If you remember, during the last election, there were a large number of elected or strong political leaders who were pulled from different parties and either compelled into joining the PTI or backing out from elections at the last moment. He has the power of blackmail. Any journalist who writes against or even questions the armed forces, and when they talk about goons who pick them up, everyone knows whose goons they are. They are the ISI goons. It is the ISI or the deep, which is where actually the deep state word implies, which controls all the terrorist groups. Whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan, that is why you found the DG ISI Faiz sitting there, Faiz Hamid sitting there, just prior to the inauguration of the Taliban government. He actually pushed that government to be formed. And that was the biggest blunder that Pakistan made, because by removing the moderates from the scene, you ensured that the government will never be recognized. Or maybe that is what Pakistan wanted, because now the government has only Pakistan to depend on and nobody else in the world bothers about it. And so they're the ones who are doing the manipulation. They're the ones who are controlling the LET. They're the ones who are controlling JEM and the other terrorist groups. So when you talk of the deep state, you talk of the power of a state within a state, which actually controls the entire state and manipulates the entire political system.
Right.
Why was Imran Khan so scared to have the DG ISI changed?
Right.
Because he was banking on the DG ISI to give him a term, and he was banking on returning the favor by making him the army chief. So, that because he is the all-powerful, if he's got to blackmail anyone else in the army, he has the tools. He has the spy agencies. He's got everything to monitor everything. So basically, and frankly, as far as, when you're looking at projecting the sort of disinformation, that is not actually the flow of ISI. That flows from the ISPR, the DG of Inter-Services Public Relations. He doesn't function under the ISI, the separate body. But the fact is that both of them function under the army chief, so therefore automatically it is part of one organization.
Right.
And he's the one who plays the game
Right.
as per what the DGISI wants.
So in such a situation, and you've also gone on to mention several examples where disinformation campaigns were targeted in the recent developments in Indian society. How would a common man be able to differentiate and define that this is certain amount of propaganda that is being thrown at them? So how does one prepare to sort of sort that out from the other garb of news that's there?
You see, what is done in a disinformation campaign is only twisting of rules, regulations, and twisting of incidents. If you take the case, say, of the CAA, it was projected in a very different manner. It was not the manner in it was projected. It had not stopped anyone else from applying for Indian citizenship. It only said we will give preference to the following. That's what it said. And that's exactly what you did when it came down to the Indians coming back from Afghanistan. But why was it twisted and projected? You look at the recent case of the incident of the air crash, the helicopter crash of General Bipin Rawat. You see the way that was being projected by the ISPR. You look at the killing of Buranwani, the way it was twisted, which led to riots. And you look at the way it was exploited in Pakistan when you named a circle after him and I mean, the sort of wonders that you did.
This was historically perhaps limited to Kashmir majorly. Now you see this happening all over India, or is that true, or is it not?
It has always been happening across India. If you look at it, the CAA riots were about last year. You look at Punjab, whenever anything happens there, it is twisted. Because you have got the Khalistanis on your side. After all, you're funding them because you were always funding them even earlier. So you were using that to twist it in the other direction.
Right.
And now with the Khalistan supporters in some form gaining power or getting a sort of political recognition in Canada and others in other parts of the world who are funding. Now you look at the way you've been able to build up that organization. Look at the recent arrest in Germany.
Yeah.
So you are able to fund and develop an organization and let it grow to a level, to a time when it starts managing on its own.
Right.
But, and they've always attempted it. After all, when the Punjab crisis took off, there was a Pakistan hand behind. So it's been there. But the question is, when you cool off on one, they move elsewhere.
Right. Is this also
now
because
if you look
Pakistan
at even
has a very good lobbying, good lobby in America, because they can mobilize several media against and create a popular narrative that disfavors India?
you see, you've got to get two facts clear on that. Firstly, the question is that Pak is backed by China. China has a large hold in the US media networks. There have been reports of China funding the US media to a very large amount. If you go back to about maybe a year ago, you'll get a whole collection of articles on the amount of money China spent on US media. So automatically, whatever Pakistan wants to do, it's not that it can grab anymore. After all, to get people to come together for any protest, it's not difficult either in the US or is it in London. But you notice that the sort of protest or the impact that it has been almost nix. Those that have been organized by the Indian community have been effective. But yes, what happens is when in the Western world, you have an India which is rising, an India which cannot be ignored, an India where decisions taken impact the world. Now, in such an environment, there's always a desire to pull down the country. If you just look at the second wave of the pandemic, you look at the way the photographs are being displayed in US media. Look at the way they projected our burning pyres. Look at the way they projected the bodies that were supposed to be floating in the Ganges. And on the other side, with almost double the number of casualties and double number of the cases even going on now, you found them showing that photograph of a white flag being placed in a field in Washington as a mark of respect. Now, why this sort of dichotomy? I mean, why this sort of, the difference in views? The intention is to bring down the Indian image.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. General Sudhakarji, we were also having this conversation about how critical infrastructure is perhaps being targeted by the Pakistani establishment. But my question to you is, if this was a concern with China, we do believe that they have a certain advanced machinery that can support such sort of an offensive. But does Pakistan have that ability is what the question is.
Sharon, it's a very interesting question you have asked, and let me once again, at the cost of repetition, highlight the issue that no state can continue to be a deep state without support of a major power nearby in the proximity. So, in the instant case, we have to understand that China as a Pakistan's deep state cannot continue or sustain itself in an effective manner unless there is some intrinsic support from China. So let's take it that, like General has already brought out, that China willy-nilly has been right since the birth of Pakistan has been supporting Pakistan. That is one issue. Second issue is much of the questions will actually, be answered in a suitable manner if we understand the core principles of the establishment. The core principle of the establishment of the deep state of Pakistan, given the fact that Pakistan army rules the roost, it is at the center stage of the deep state. And ISI is a tri-service organization, by the way. It has got its officials are from all three services. So as DGISPR, which the general was bringing out, is the core issue of the principles of the deep state of Pakistan is based on the paradigm of India as an arch rival. Start point. And second point is the existential threat is justified by the factor of the Kashmir dispute. And the third point is that they have identified, it is enlisted in one of the important documents, which is not publicized adequately, that one of the core principles of the deep state is to ensure 100% Islamization of Pakistan. And the fourth point is to maintain Punjab as the heartland of Pakistan. Also alongside, got to bear in mind, our viewers will be finding it interesting that as an informal document, it is listed that the non-state actors or the militants will be effectively used by the deep state. Okay, and the last point is about forming of alliance with the other Muslim majority countries. So right from the genesis of the birth of Pakistan, they have looked towards the Middle East, not towards India for any kind of support, be it ideology or anything for that matter. So having said all this, the point which you are throwing is about the China. China and Pakistan in collusion, they have been operating to destabilize India, to isolate India, as per my understanding. Be it the Mumbai power failure, be it the Indigo, the website which got dysfunctional, I think, a year and a half back, be it the Northern Grid actually experiencing a power failure. The latest methodology, which is not coming out open in open medium, is that there are new techniques which are being adopted. When you talk about the selective killing, which we witnessed in the recent past in J&K Valley, it is one of the methods they are applying. Similarly, the disruptions in the power supply, if the power fails, everything fails. When the investigations were carried out, it didn't actually reach the public attention. The fingers were pointing at somebody from China. Right. Okay. Similarly, when they actually make our systems inoperational, given the fact that all of them are automated these days, much of our businesses are being conducted online today. So therefore, they have a major role to play to isolate India in a big way by means of cyber, by means of space, by means of attacks without any military method. So right. One of the...
Is it safe to say that as a part of the Bleed India by 1,000 Cuts policy, they've also integrated a lot of asymmetric means, in which popular language is called war by other means, right?
Yeah, absolutely. War by other means. This is one of the methods which they have been applying. In fact, also that reminds me of a factor that China always believes and practices the 36 stratagem. If it wants to hurt you, it will not directly slap you or hit you. It is
Right.
through so many other agencies in between, they will impact you in an indirect means. So
Right.
perhaps that also is a method. It's using Pakistan to inflict maximum kind of damage on the nation state of India, be it
It's
economic.
almost as if, in the case of United States, China uses North Korea as a dummy to, sort of send out threats.
My point, Sharon, you see, when we are discussing about the deep state, discussing about the information warfare which Pakistan has unleashed, I would say to a large extent it is at the behest of China, which Pakistan is actually doing it against us. Take your mind back. Pakistan is following a model which was applied successfully way back in 2006 by Hezbollah. Hezbollah, in a 34 days war, they had brought Israelis down on their knees, primarily applying this information warfare successfully by different methods. They started the basic, there is one person who is actually an admin in one of the groups. He expands his operational base. Thereafter, he goes into establish a radio station. From radio station goes to a kind of a TV station. From TV station to a satellite TV. So the extent, the spectrum of the time which the TV station continues to actually dominate the entire this thing is based on the concept of image, which the journalism actually bringing out. When you project a storyline, rather than talking, if you project with the help of the image, it has a tremendous impact to respond to your query. How is it impacting the civil population? How is he able to distinguish? He cannot distinguish. It is so blurred. It is merging with the real picture, the virtual picture. It is very difficult to actually. So the best way to counter is to have a similar kind of a system, or maybe a better and effective system than what Pakistan is trying. Institutionalize it, have structures created, and select your target audience, then go full hog in beating the enemy in this operation of other than military.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. General Harsha, you've written almost on the same lines as to what India can do in terms of countering the information warfare by Pakistan. So as far as this psychological warfare / information warfare is concerned, I mean, whatever publicly available information is there, what can you tell us about what our audience should know? And in terms of state policy, what should India do?
See, as far as the audience is concerned, we need to be careful. Firstly, what comes in as inputs in the newspapers is possibly more factual than what comes in social media. What you get in groups, what you get by the fastest finger first on WhatsApp, who believes in forwarding without reading, you would find a lot of fake news being circulated. And by the time you realize it's fake, it's rather late. You've got to learn to believe, and you've got to learn to realize that the state is not against you. What you come across are attempts to make you believe that the state is against you, which will not happen, because after all, you are part of the state, and the state and you work as one. So it's like General Sudhakar said, it's a very thin line, but then you can only realize that thin line provided you are not, I repeat, not ideologically taken away, or you have not twisted your ideology away from the mainstream, in which case then it's difficult. Then it's easy for you to be sucked into. Second, you need to be able to understand that everything that you read can't be believed unless you're reading it in a factual, in a factual manner, which is possibly the newspaper or possibly the news. Otherwise, you need to be careful. The other aspect is, yes, you need to have an organization, not exactly to counter them. I wouldn't say to hit back at them. That will be part of it, which is part of the role of any counter disinformation organization. But more importantly, you need to project the reality to your own. The reality can be projected through multiple means. I mean, you can have your, once you start spreading it, it's like today, let me tell you what WhatsApp I get, which is possibly marked forwarded many times. No matter which group you are in, no matter which language group you are in, no matter whether it's your school group, maybe I wouldn't have even heard about it. If it's with me today, it'll be with you tomorrow. If it's with you today, it'll be with me tomorrow or day after. That's the power of social media. What comes in on Instagram or Twitter, you may not see it today, but the rate at which it will keep coming and getting forwarded and retweeted and commented on, it will somewhere or the other come on the table again.
Right.
So you need to get means to try and correct whatever is wrong and comment on whatever is wrong. It has to be organized. It has to be institutionalized.
Right.
You've got different groups, different setups which are working, but they're not a cohesive one, which is something that we lack.
Yeah.
The second aspect is, yes, you have groups outside whom you need to target, because if someone is targeting you, you need to target them back. And if you need to target them back, you know whom you need to target. You know how you need to target. You know in which manner you need to spread the word. And that is something which can be done. You can do it through social media. You can do it by giving official support. You can do it by giving diplomatic support. You can raise it in international organizations. There are multiple means by which it can be done. But then the message has to go to the target audience. That is what you got to need to aim at. And I think when you look at, so therefore, whenever you create something like this, it has to be an organization under an entity which can influence, not only on social media, but also influence it in different forms, whether it be through diplomacy, whether it be through protests, whether it be in whichever manner.
Right.
So therefore, it has to be part of an organization system.
Yeah.
And that is what is important. I'm not going to tell you where and how, because there are multiple places under which it can be run.
Right. Well, it's true, because in the case of United States and major world powers, they have institutionalized departments for information warfare. And India is much more covert about all of these things, and it's not really out in the open. But even if we were to look at institutions like the USIA, United States Information Agency, I mean, in the garb, under the garb of public diplomacy, we all know the kind of psychological warfare that they've been doing. The extent of the effect is questionable, of course, because when you look at outcomes of, say, Vietnam and Afghanistan, one needs to be questioned, especially about their cultural understanding of a certain region. But on the same lines, perhaps India should consider, especially because it's on the defensive when it comes to all of these things.
See, when you're looking at projecting what you want to project, unless you go for the US one is to project, not grab a target audience. The US one is to project the US image, the US view, the way it is supporting you. Your aim is not that. Your aim is to get the target audience to do what you want them to do. That's exactly what the other side is doing on us. If you want the Baluch to react in a particular way, you want the Pashtuns to react in a particular way, you got to look at the way you can do it. How do you influence that community?
Right.
Okay, after all, that's a community whose leadership has always been approaching you for help.
Yeah.
It's not that you're doing it out of the blue. The communities have been asking you, please help us, because we are the suppressed masses. We're not being treated as humans. We need to be treated as humans. You're not trying to do anything wrong. You're trying to give them the sort of respect a human being deserves.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, sir. Before concluding, General Sudhakarji, would you like to give your closing remarks, please?
Thank you for giving this opportunity. I think rightfully it should go to the senior panelist.
No, please, Sudhakar, it's your show.
So anyway, thank you so much. All I wish to say with regard to this information warfare is that I would like to take the example, very small example about the Crimea Peninsula. Russia, way back in 2014, how overnight things could undergo a sweeping change without having fired a shot with the help of the social media. And the pro-Russian governing party was actually swapped over in no time. And that's how the Crimea is in the hands of the Russia today. So similarly, I'm sorry, I'm giving examples of the militant organization. There is so much to learn from ISIS. ISIS at one point in time, its information campaign or the information warfare was so absolutely extensive.
I mean, it's also important to acknowledge for what it is, because they've been very effective with their disinformation campaign and propaganda, which is why you see a lot of recruits, right? Correct. So there's no glorification or anything, but it's a statement of reality. Having
said all that, what I wish to actually highlight in the concluding remarks is that that it's about time that we identify our own fault line. It's important to keep our internal cohesion intact. Internal cohesion is fundamental and necessary for any nation state to grow, and grow in terms of towards a regional power or global recognition as a power, number one. Number two, if we have to contain, let's not unnecessarily dissipate our energy in digressing all our effort and energy towards countering Pakistan's information campaign or the influence operation. Let's have a segment well organized, well structured, well thought through. Let's identify the theme. Pakistan itself as a nation state has got huge kinds of fault lines, be it the ethnic divide, be it the caste, be it the composition, be it the demand for Pashtun land, demand for Balochistan, or otherwise. There are numerous kinds of themes which can be picked up by us, can be played by this particular organization without actually sucking too much of energy of the national resource. That's all I have to say. Back to you, please.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me for this conversation. I mean, this is my area of interest, and this is something that I wrote my thesis on as well during my master's. So every time I discuss information warfare or psychological warfare, it's very imperative also, especially because of social media, right? You never know. I mean, being journalists, we are so used to seeing fake news and sort of discarding that. And in spite of that, sometimes disinformation can get you, and that's how dangerous it is. And if we move on to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, one can only imagine, because there is not really any media education, media literacy among the masses, and that's a problem. And like both of you rightly said, there needs to be more education about this. There needs to be more institutionalization of such factors so that we can perhaps very effectively tackle the disinformation campaigns. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. Viewers, please do let us know what you thought about this particular one. Until then, this is your host, Sharan Sethi, signing off.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I hope that was
Bye-bye.
good.
So well spoken, sir. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thanks, Sudhakar.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.